Hello and welcome. Wherever you are watching from today, whether that is here in the States or Canada or the United Kingdom or Australia or somewhere I have never set foot, I am glad you are here. Having spent years studying the research on how food acts on the aging body, I want to start with something that surprises almost everyone who asks me about their digestion. Nobody ever told you what to feed it. You were told to eat more fiber in the vaguest possible terms, and eventually you were told that a slower, more sensitive stomach is simply what happens after 60. But almost nobody sat you down and explained that the largest population of living cells you carry is not made of you at all, and that it eats what you leave for it. Before we go one step further, let me be very clear with you. If you have been diagnosed with Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, diverticulitis, celiac disease, or irritable bowel syndrome, if you have had bowel surgery, or if you take any medication that suppresses your immune system, please talk with your own doctor before you change anything about how you eat. Nothing in this video replaces the person who can actually examine you. This is general education about food, and that is all it is. Now, here is the number that made me want to record this one. According to the National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases, part of the National Institutes of Health, constipation alone is one of the most common digestive complaints reported by adults over 60. Most of those people were never given a mechanism. They were given a fiber supplement and sent home. And here is what makes your gut different from every other organ we have discussed on this channel. Your heart is yours. Your liver is yours. But the last few feet of your digestive tract are shared. They house a dense community of bacteria that performs work your own cells cannot do. Here is that work, and it is the single most important idea in this video. The cells lining your colon have a preferred fuel, not the glucose that feeds most of your body, but a short-chain fatty acid called butyrate, and your body cannot manufacture it. It exists only when the bacteria in your colon ferment the fiber you ate, and it is absorbed by the lining right there on the spot. That is why eat more fiber is such a poor instruction. Fiber is a category, not a substance, and different bacteria ferment different kinds. Feed one kind, and you feed one part of the community. So today I am going to give you 6 foods, counting down from number 6 to number 1, chosen, because between them they supply the specific materials that community is asking for. And I will tell you now, number 1 is not a supplement. It is not exotic, and it costs about $2. The surprise is not the food. It is what one change in how you prepare it does to what your gut can do with it. Stay with me through all 6. Before I start, do me a favor. Tell me in the comments how old you are and whether you have quietly started avoiding foods you once ate without a second thought. That habit tells you more than you would think. And because so many of you have asked me to put all of this in one place, I have. In just a moment, a code will appear on your screen. Scan it with your phone camera, and it will take you to the 90-year blueprint, which gathers everything I teach about eating for the aging body into one simple guide. It is my gift to you. There is nothing to buy and nothing to sign up for. Take it, read it slowly, and keep it somewhere you will actually look at it again. Now let me explain how I want you to listen to this list, because it is not a shopping list. It is a mechanism list. Almost every video you have ever seen about gut health hands you a name and moves straight on. Eat yogurt, eat fiber. That is not teaching, that is a slogan, and slogans do not survive a busy week because the moment life gets complicated, you forget them. So for every single one of these 6, I'm going to do 3 things in the same order. First, I will name the actual compound doing the work. Second, I will explain what that compound physically does once it reaches your colon in plain language. And third, I will tell you exactly how to get it onto your plate this week in a form you will genuinely eat. There is one more thing I want you to hold on to as we go. Every one of these 6 is doing one of 2 jobs. It is either sending down raw material for fermentation, or it is sending down living organisms. Those are different jobs, and you need both. Keep that distinction in mind, and by the end, you will understand this subject better than most people ever will. Let us begin at number 6. Number 6 is oats. The compound here is beta-glucan, and it is a soluble fiber with an unusual physical property. It is viscous. When beta-glucan meets water in your digestive tract, it forms a soft gel, and that gel changes the behavior of everything traveling alongside it. Here's what it physically does. Because it is viscous, it slows the rate at which the contents of your stomach empty into the small intestine, which is part of why a bowl of oats holds you for longer than the same number of calories from toast. But the part that matters for today happens further down. Beta-glucan is not digested by your own enzymes. It arrives in the colon essentially intact, and there it is fermented readily by resident bacteria, producing exactly the short-chain fatty acids I described a moment ago, including butyrate. This is why beta-glucan is one of the most studied fibers in nutrition science. The Food and Drug Administration recognizes beta-glucan soluble fiber from whole oats in the context of heart health, and that recognition exists precisely because its physical behavior in the gut is so well characterized. The National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases lists whole grains among its core recommendations for adults trying to raise fiber intake. And let me give you the number you were never given. The Dietary Guidelines for Americans, published jointly by the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Health and Human Services, set adequate fiber intake at roughly 14 grams for every 1,000 calories eaten, which works out at about 22 to 28 grams a day for women over 50 and about 28 to 34 grams a day for men. The average American adult takes in somewhere around 15, so this is not a small shortfall at the margins. Most people are eating roughly half of what the community downstream is built to receive, and they have been doing it for decades. There is a second reason oats belong at the start of this list rather than the end. They are gentle. If your digestion has become sensitive, a viscous soluble fiber is a far kinder place to begin than a large pile of raw vegetables. How to add this to your plate? Half a cup of rolled oats or steel-cut oats, cooked several mornings a week, not the sweetened instant sachets, which are largely sugar with oat dust in them. Rolled or steel-cut, cooked with water or milk, and given something to sit alongside. And if you are increasing fiber from a low starting point, increase it slowly and drink more water than you think you need. I will come back to that point at the end, because it is where most people go wrong. Number 5 is kefir, and if you cannot find kefir, plain live yogurt. Now here we switch jobs. Oats sent down raw material. Kefir sends down living organisms. The compounds, if we can call them that, are live bacterial and yeast cultures. Kefir is milk fermented by a mixed culture, and it typically carries a broader range of microbial species than standard yogurt does. That fermentation also consumes a good deal of the lactose in the milk, which is why a great many people who find ordinary milk uncomfortable tolerate kefir without difficulty. Here is what those organisms physically do, and I want to be honest with you about this because there is a great deal of overstatement in this area. The bacteria in fermented milk are, for the most part, not permanent settlers. They are passing through. But passing through is not the same as doing nothing. While they are in transit, they produce lactic acid and other compounds that lower the local pH. They compete for space and resources with less desirable organisms, and they arrive already carrying enzymes that help break down the lactose alongside them. The National Institutes of Health Office of Dietary Supplements is careful to describe the effects of live cultures as strain-specific and generally transient, and that honesty is exactly why regularity matters more than quantity here. Think of it as reinforcements rather than residents. They help while they are there, so you send them regularly. How to add this to your plate? A small glass of plain, unsweetened kefir daily, or a serving of plain live yogurt, where the label actually says live or active cultures. Plain. The flavored tubs are a dessert, and the sugar load undoes much of the point. If dairy does not suit you, a live cultured, non-dairy fermented product does the same job. Number 4 is kiwifruit. I suspect this is the first one on the list that sounds unexpected, and it is here because the evidence behind it is genuinely strong and specific. There are two compounds at work. The first is a protein-digesting enzyme called actinidin, which occurs naturally in kiwifruit and is unusual among common fruits. The second is the fruit's fiber, which has a high capacity to hold water. Here is what they physically do. Actinidin assists in the breakdown of proteins in the stomach and upper small intestine, which is one proposed reason a kiwi fruit eaten after a substantial meal can leave people feeling less heavy. The fiber then does its work further down. Because it holds water so well, it increases the water content and the bulk of the stool, and stool that holds water moves. That sounds almost too simple to be a mechanism, but the movement of material through the colon is very largely a question of water and bulk, and that is where a great deal of ordinary, everyday constipation actually begins. What lifts this above a home remedy is that clinical practice guidance from the American Gastroenterological Association has specifically addressed kiwi fruit among dietary options for chronic constipation, alongside more familiar interventions. That is an unusual position for a single fruit to occupy, and it did not get there by folklore. How to add this to your plate: 2 ripe kiwi fruit a day, eaten whole, and if you are willing, eat the skin. Wash it and eat it. The skin roughly doubles the fiber you get, and the texture is far less objectionable than people expect, particularly on the smooth-skinned golden varieties. If the skin is a step too far, 2 scooped kiwi fruit still do most of the work. We are halfway. Before I give you number 3, if this is making sense to you, if you are finally getting the mechanism and not just the rule, would you press the like button for me? It genuinely does help this channel reach other people in our age group who were handed a fiber supplement and no explanation at all. And if you are new here, subscribe, because this is what I do every week. No hype, no miracle foods, just the actual biology explained slowly enough to be useful, right? Number 3? Number 3 is beans and lentils. The compounds are resistant starch, and just as importantly, fiber diversity. And I want to spend a moment on that second word because it is the idea most people have never been given. Here is what they physically do. Beans and lentils carry starch that resists digestion in the small intestine, and they carry several structurally different fibers at once. Those different fibers are fermented by different bacterial species. This matters because the community in your colon is not one organism performing one task. It is many with different appetites. And a community fed a single fiber repeatedly becomes a narrower community. This is the finding that changed how I think about the subject. The American Gut Project, a large citizen science study, reported that the strongest dietary predictor of microbial diversity in its participants was not whether they described themselves as vegetarian and not any single food. It was the number of different plant species eaten in a week, with a marked difference observed at around 30 different plants weekly compared with 10 or fewer. 30 sounds enormous until you realize that herbs, spices, nuts, seeds, grains, and beans all count individually. Beans and lentils are the most efficient way to move that number. A mixed bean dish is 4 or 5 plants in one pot. How to add this to your plate: half a cup, 3 or 4 times a week, and vary the type rather than eating the same tin repeatedly. Tinned is fine, and rinsing tinned beans well under the tap removes a good deal of the sodium and some of the compounds that cause wind. If beans have historically disagreed with you, start with half of that portion and build. The discomfort people report is very often a community that has not been fed this way in years catching up, and it usually settles over a few weeks. Number 2 is sauerkraut, and more broadly, fermented vegetables. This is our second entry in the living organisms category, and it earns its place above Kefir for a reason I will come to. The compounds are live lactic acid bacteria, produced by the vegetable fermenting in salt and its own liquid, and the polyphenols of the raw vegetable underneath. Here is what they physically do. The lactic acid bacteria do much the same transient work I described earlier, but they arrive alongside something kefir cannot offer, which is the intact fiber and polyphenol content of the vegetable itself. So a single serving is doing both jobs at once. It is sending down organisms, and it is sending down material for the residents to ferment. That combination is why traditional fermented vegetables appear across so many long-lived food cultures without anyone having planned it that way. There is a detail here that decides whether you get any of this at all, and almost everyone gets it wrong. Shelf-stable sauerkraut, the kind sold warm in a tin or a jar on an ordinary shelf, has been pasteurized. Pasteurization is heat, and heat kills the cultures. It is still a perfectly good vegetable, but the living component is gone. The Mayo Clinic makes this same distinction when discussing fermented foods. How to add this to your plate? Look in the refrigerated section, not the ambient aisle. The label should say raw, unpasteurized, or live. 2 tablespoons alongside a meal, not a bowlful, because the salt content is real and it is easy to overdo. And do not cook it. Add it to the plate after the heat is off, or you have simply pasteurized it yourself. And number 1, the one I told you almost everyone walks past. Number 1 is the ordinary potato, cooked and then cooled. I know exactly how that sounds. Stay with me for 2 minutes, because the mechanism here is one of the most elegant in the whole of nutrition, and it costs you nothing to use. The compound is resistant starch, specifically retrograded resistant starch. Here is what physically happens. A raw potato is full of starch packed into tight crystalline granules. When you cook it, water and heat force those granules open and the starch becomes fully available to your digestive enzymes. That is gelatinization, and it is why a hot potato is digested quickly and easily in the small intestine, arriving in your bloodstream as glucose. Now cool it. As the cooked starch drops in temperature, a portion of those molecules reassociate and recrystallize into a new structure. That process is called retrogradation. And here is the part that matters. Your digestive enzymes cannot open that new structure. So that portion of the starch is no longer food for you at all. It travels the full length of the small intestine untouched and arrives in the colon, where it becomes food for the bacteria instead. They ferment it, and the fermentation of resistant starch is particularly well recognized for producing butyrate, the exact fuel your colon lining prefers. You have not changed the ingredient. You have changed nothing about what you bought. You cooked it, and you let it go cold, and in doing so, you converted part of it from something that feeds you into something that feeds the ecosystem that protects you, and it survives gentle reheating. The recrystallized portion is considerably more heat stable than the original granules, so a potato cooked, refrigerated overnight, and warmed through the next day retains a good deal of it. This is not exclusive to potatoes. Cooked and cooled rice does it. Cooked and cooled pasta does it. Slightly green bananas carry resistant starch of a different type. But the potato is the cheapest, the most widely available, and the one already sitting in most kitchens. How to add this to your plate. Cook extra potatoes tonight, refrigerate them overnight, eat them cold in a salad the next day, with olive oil rather than a heavy mayonnaise, or warm them gently and eat them as you normally would. That is the entire instruction. Cook, cool, then eat. Now let me put all 6 together, because they were never meant to be 6 separate rules. Go back to the 2 jobs I asked you to hold on to: raw material and living organisms. Oats, kiwifruit, beans and lentils, and cooled potatoes are all raw material. Each one sends down a different fermentable substance. Oats send a viscous, soluble fiber. Kiwifruit sends a water-holding fiber and an enzyme. Beans send resistant starch and several structurally different fibers at once. Cooled potatoes send retrograded resistant starch. 4 foods, 4 different materials, feeding different members of the community. Kefir and sauerkraut are the living organisms. They arrive, they compete, they acidify their surroundings, and they leave. Here is the synthesis, and it is the reason this list is ordered as it is. Sending organisms into a colon you have not fed is like sending skilled workers to a site with no materials. They arrive, they find nothing to work with, and they move on. And sending material without ever sending organisms means the work is done only by whichever residents you already happen to have, however narrow that population has become. Do both and something different happens. The material arrives, a diverse population is there to ferment it, short-chain fatty acids are produced in quantity, and the cells lining your colon are fed with their preferred fuel by the very process you started at breakfast. That is the whole system. 4 materials, 2 sources of organisms, and 1 output that your own body cannot make for itself. And notice what is absent from that description. Nothing is being stripped out of you. There is no product and no special regime. There is a fermentation chamber that has been undersupplied for some years, and 6 ordinary foods that supply it properly. If you take one sentence from today, take this one. You are not trying to remove something from your gut. You are trying to feed what is already living there. Before I let you go, there are 3 things that sit outside the plate, and leaving them out would make this incomplete. The first is water, and this is where most people who take this advice go wrong. Fiber works by holding water. If you increase fiber substantially and do not increase your fluid alongside it, you can genuinely make things slower and more uncomfortable rather than better. That is not the fiber failing. That is fiber doing exactly what it does with nothing to hold. Raise both together and raise them over 2 or 3 weeks rather than starting tomorrow with all 6 of these at once. The second is movement. The muscular contractions that move material through your colon respond to physical activity. A walk after a meal is not a folk remedy, it is a genuine mechanical input, and for people who have become less active, it is often the single largest missing factor. The third is medication. A number of extremely common medications slow gut motility as a side effect, including some opioid painkillers, certain blood pressure medications, some antidepressants, and iron supplements. If your digestion changed noticeably at around the time a new prescription started, that is not a coincidence to dismiss. It is a question for your doctor and possibly your pharmacist. And now the caveat I promised you at the start, because this is where general advice flips. Everything I have described today assumes a healthy digestive tract that is simply underfed. If you have an active flare of inflammatory bowel disease or acute diverticulitis, a high-fiber, high-fermentation approach can be exactly the wrong thing at exactly the wrong moment, and your doctor may well ask you to do the opposite for a period. There is no contradiction there. Different situation, different instruction. One more, and please hear this one. Some changes are not dietary questions at all. A persistent change in your bowel habit lasting several weeks, bleeding, unexplained weight loss, or new and persistent abdominal pain are symptoms to have looked at promptly by a doctor. Do not put those on a food list. Put them in front of a person who can examine you. I want to say something before we finish. If you are in your 60s or 70s or 80s, and you have quietly narrowed what you eat over the years because things stopped agreeing with you, I want you to know that narrowing was not a verdict. In a great many cases, it was an ecosystem getting less varied because it was being sent less variety, and that is a loop that can turn the other way. Slowly, and with patience, but it can. And if you know someone who has stopped eating half the things they used to love and has simply decided that is what getting older means, send this to them. That is a kinder thing to pass along than most of what circulates. And once more, because it matters. If you have Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, diverticulitis, celiac disease, or irritable bowel syndrome, if you have had bowel surgery, or if you take medication that suppresses your immune system, please speak to your own doctor before making these changes. This video is general education about food. It is not medical advice, and it is not a substitute for the person who can actually examine you. So, scan the code on your screen and take the 90-year blueprint. It is free, it is my gift to you, and the only thing I ask is that you actually use it. Subscribe if you would like me to keep doing this, because there is a great deal more of the aging body left to explain, and tell me in the comments which of the 6 you are going to start with. I suspect a lot of you are going to say the potato, and I would be delighted because it is the one that costs you nothing but a night in the refrigerator. Look after yourself. I will see you next time.